Why, hello there. And how are we doing this fine day? No, 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 no. That opening's not gonna happen ever again. Sorry about that. I'm gonna end up being EDC Bob Ross or something. Actually, how does that guy do that? How is he both soothing, iconic, actually, and a little bit weird at the same time? Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense at all. You freak me out a little, Bob Ross, and your happy little trees and clouds and things. Oh crap! We're almost to 40 seconds into this, and I haven't even touched or talked about knife. Yeah. Segue into the knife. Screw that. Segue into the knife. Providing a segue. Yep. It's knife time. We're looking at a quick overview of the Benchmade Barrage Osborne design, limited edition, in S90V steel, which is pretty darn corrosion proof, pretty darn good edge retention. Not necessarily the toughest steel, but honestly, it's probably one of, in my opinion, the best all-around steels, because I think you get a little more toughness than like M390. And a lot of times with the heat treats on M390 and this, you're probably getting comparable, if not better, edge retention sometimes, so I really like S90V. Yeah. This particular one is in Velox scales, and that is supposed to be some sort of extra chem-resistant durable plastic, I guess. Sure, why not? They're white, sort of a stormtrooper thing got going on here. And this one has a Tonto, and I really like the shape of this Tonto. I don't know why, it just spoke to me. I mean, this is the only Benchmade I have. This is my first Benchmade, first experience. It's not great, not perfect, but not as bad in some areas as I thought, but worse in others. We'll talk about that in a moment. But back to the blade, I like the shape. It kind of gives you that sort of almost symmetrical, like almost, dagger or something like that. I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just talking. I mean, for God's sakes, it started opening up with Bob Ross for some reason. Okay. Quick look at the knife. It's got a 3.5-inch blade, I want to say. A little over 3.5 inches of blade, and a little under 8.5 inches in total length. I've already done a full review on this one, which I will link down below. This thing is on phosphor bronze, like pretty much all Benchmades, or as far as I know, all Benchmades. It is a crossbar axis lock, also like any folding Benchmade, as far as I know. Was there a time when they did do differently? I don't know. I'm not that old into the knife community, or possibly that old at all. I think they've been around since like the 90s or something like that, right? 80s, 90s. Let's see. Does it say on their box? I'd be surprised if it doesn't. Okay, so that's the one thing it doesn't say on their box or on the blade. When they were originally, yeah, that's the only thing it doesn't say, apparently. This knife came assisted. It is assisted. The Barrage is assisted. The site I got this thing from did not mention that, so I thought maybe like this is limited edition because it's a special edition. No, wasn't. It was like one that wasn't assisted. Clearly not the case, but I have de-assisted this thing, as you can sort of tell by the fact that it closes. And that was done pretty easy. I have a video for that too, and maybe I'll link that down below. You just take the knife apart, and you remove this, I don't know what I thought I was doing there. You remove this spring out of the pivot. There's just a hole milled in there, and you just sort of pop it out, and you're good to go. You put it back together, and it's not assisted anymore. And that's one of the areas where this thing excelled beyond my expectation, was the action. I mean, access bar locks on phosphor bronze in general aren't great. So I wasn't expecting much, but as you can see, this actually has a little kick to it out of the just open. I mean, it's not going to throw itself open, but it does have more kick and a little bit of what might account for a detent. And on the close, as long as you pull the access bar lock all the way back and hold it there, as you can see, this thing is near drop shut. And honestly, once I took it apart, oiled it, and put it back together, that's what it did very, very quickly. Like, almost immediately. Things to mention on this one, we got T6 on all of these many screws on the outside. I don't like that, but I have had it apart, had no problem with the screws. Okay, there's a pivot under there, that's T8. And one thing that's weird is one of these screws, I think it's this one, is longer than the rest. So it was kind of screwing with me when I was putting it back together. Something else I've noticed, and I think this might be a problem if the Benchmade you have happens to have this, but I noticed that this screw, which is actually holding in the stop pin, if this is tightened too far or too tight, that can dramatically impact the action. Like, if I tighten that down, it's not going to do that. So you basically have to dial in the tightness on the pivot, which somehow there is no play. No play at all, which I've heard a lot of Benchmades have. And you got to dial in this to get that action kind of right. A bit of a chunky knife. Thick, contoured. I mean, it's plastic, but it is what it is. You've got Benchmade's, one of Benchmade's classic kind of sort of clips. I think this thing has a little too much tension on it, personally. But it's a continuous rise, so it does work in and out of the pocket. It's a little pokey, but in a little bit tight. Full back spacer. Plastic, of course. Another feature of this thing I like is the secondary lock, especially if you have it assisted so it doesn't go off in your pocket. You basically press this down, and all it does is, you see this little bar, it pushes that bar down a little bit and then forward, and that bar is metal and it seats right behind the access bar. That'll keep it closed, locked in the closed and open positions, which is a nice feature, especially on a knife that's normally assisted. I don't love Benchmade's branding. I mean, you have their logo, but for some reason they like doing their logo where it goes down onto the primary bevel of the knife. I just want that up there, just clean, just completely on the flat. I don't know why that bothers me, but it does. And then you got Osborne, and you got Benchmade's website for some reason. I don't know. I mean, S9DV and limited edition's fine. Even the Osborne's fine. But I don't know. That brings us to most of the good. I mean, I do actually like this knife. I can say that. I like this knife, and I got this knife for a good price. They're not a good price anymore. This particular one, you might be able to find out there, but I got this one. I think this is like an older edition, limited edition. I don't know. I got this for $200, which is actually pretty reasonable and acceptable. And what I got, I'm still reasonably happy with. Now, they're not $200. No, the Barrages are not, if you get a new one. But, yeah, that's a Benchmade thing. It's comfortable in the hand. It's a little bit chunky behind the edge, and the blade stock's pretty thin, but behind the edge it gets a little chunky fast. A little thick fast, yeah. It's a harder kind of use style knife, and it still cuts pretty well. But that brings us to one of the biggest things that I had an issue with when I got this knife, is it had a nice big old burr on it. I had to sharpen this thing out of the box. It was not sharp. It was not cutting. That really can't happen, guys. I mean, that can't happen. That's not acceptable on $100 knife, right? Let alone a $200 knife, let alone a legacy company, USA-made knife. It was a bit disappointing there. And, I mean, for those reasons, I'm not going to say, oh, I can recommend this knife. I can't recommend the regular Barrage. It's too expensive. It's QC issues. I mean, this thing is not centered at all. I mean, if you push it over so the blade is, in fact, centered, it's still a little off-center, but it's not too bad. But as it sits, it's quite off-center. And, is it all through? Yeah, no, it is. Bend the whole thing a little bit. Let's see if we can center it up. One thing I wanted to mention is the access bar, especially on washers, but even in general. They're supposed to be finger safe, right? And yes, they are. You hold it down, as long as you keep it all the way back in this particular case, it'll get there, no problem. But on, like, a work site or something where these things are supposed to be, you know, used, if you start releasing off that tension, or you release it too early, you get something like that, or a lot of times you get something where it's, like, stops right there, if you release too early. And that strikes me as the opposite of finger safe. Because if you are working on something, and you go to put this in your pocket, once it stops here because you didn't notice that it just swung partially open, well, when you go to reorient yourself, guess where your fingers slide in front of to push into the pocket? Oftentimes, you can easily, absent-mindedly, which you're doing this absent-mindedly already, get your fingers there. And if you just sort of slide in there and go into your pocket, that is the absolute opposite of finger safe. So, I don't know how I feel about access. And this likes to pop back open particularly. See? There you go, right there. That one actually, I would think I got it closed. It popped back open. I'm not paying attention. Fingers in pain. I don't know. The access bar, it's a decent idea. But it just doesn't... I guess it works better on bearings, honestly, but you can definitely get used to it. I'm just saying that that is a hazard to watch out for. That's what I'm trying to say. Just thought that was of note. But basically, it's an odd knife that definitely needs improvement and QC improvement from, based on what you hear and what I know of Benchmade, QC improvement of Benchmade in general. Yeah. So, this is a neat one, and I'm actually glad I have it. Like I said, I do actually like this. This particular variant, this style, this blade shape, the handle, the whole thing coming together works, and I was okay with it at that price point, being that it is still quite functional now that it's sharpened and used. It's definitely been used since being sharpened a decent amount. That's actually starting to get a little dull there. No, it's still got a good decent edge though. But I don't know. Benchmade's a weird one. This is a weird knife. That's all for the summary. I don't have much else to say, really. So I'm going to call it here. See you later, guys. And forget about that intro. That's not happening ever again. See ya.